Hello, everybody, and welcome to Chapter 6. This is going to be covering nonverbal communication. I'm going to switch over to our slides, and I'll be right back. Okay. The nature of nonverbal communication. This is going to include any behaviors and characteristics that ultimately convey meaning without actually using words. So last chapter we talked about language. This chapter we're going to talk about communication minus the whole language factor. We find that some nonverbal communication behaviors are going to accompany words, while others can actually convey meaning simply on their own without having any accompanying language. There's a few characteristics of nonverbal communication. It is present in most interpersonal conversations. And when we talk about that, even if it's not face-to-face, we can still even use emojis if we're texting or sending a DM. So there's going to be still opportunities even when it isn't, if it's mediated, it isn't face-to-face. We find that nonverbal communication often conveys more than verbal communication, somebody's tone of voice, the look on their face, etc. And we also usually believe it over verbal communication. So if we're trying to actually figure out if someone is lying, we start to watch their nonverbal communication. It's the primary means of expressing emotion. So things like frowning, crying, slumping your shoulders, all of those things are going to indicate emotion, as in sadness. And nonverbal communication has the potential to meta-communicate, which is communication about communication. And an example of that would be whispering. So if you're telling someone something, you're using language, but if you drop your voice and make it very quiet, that meta communication is saying, I'm communicating about something, but I want to communicate quietly, it's a secret, that kind of thing. Nonverbal communication serves several functions. It can actually manage conversations. So in that sense, we can show people nonverbally that we're inviting them to have a conversation with us. Maybe we make eye contact, we face them directly, we smile, those kinds of things would show that we're interested in a conversation potentially. It can also maintain a conversation. So nodding our head, using hand signals to say go on, things like that, that would be maintaining a conversation. And we can also use turn-taking signals. So maybe we're talking to someone and we're done talking, and so we trail off with our tone and our pitch. So that's almost insinuating to the other person, I'm waiting for you now. I'm looking for some feedback. There are plenty of those types of turn-taking signals as well. And then we can also signal that we want to end a conversation. A really easy example to envision would be if you're done talking to somebody, you might start backing towards a door, turning your body away from them so you're not looking directly at them, giving short responses that are very monotone where you're not sounding like you're actually interested anymore. So there's plenty of those different nonverbals that you can use in order to end a conversation. Some of the functions of nonverbal communication, as I mentioned earlier, expressing emotions. We often rely on facial expressions and vocal expressions to actually express emotion. We also use it to maintain relationships. We can show immediacy behaviors through nonverbal communication, so we can give people signs that we might be attracted to them. So maybe, you know, cocking your head to the side a little bit and having that flirtatious tone of voice, or affiliation as well. shaking someone's hand, giving them a hug, those kinds of things. Those would be other ways of maintaining relationships through immediacy behaviors. Nonverbal communication can also help form impressions. We can usually or sometimes figure out the demographics of someone, their sociocultural affiliations, based on maybe the clothes that they wear, the dialect that they use, things like that. You know, you might be able to tell where somebody is from based on the way that they speak, or the fact that they're wearing a winter coat in Michigan in April. We probably would say, oh, they must be from somewhere down south, that kind of thing. Nonverbal communication can also influence others. It can help create credibility, and that comes into play with our tone of voice, how confident we sound, our enunciation, things like that. It can also promote affiliation. Oftentimes when we mirror someone's behavior, we're saying that we're affiliated with them, or that we are reinforcing their communication, etc. It can also conceal information. So we can use nonverbal communication to hide that we're lying to someone, or try to falsify the emotions that we're feeling. But generally, facial expressions are very telling, as in it's hard most of the time to falsify those types of things. We can't always see, well, we can't see usually what our faces are doing, and so we don't necessarily realize that we're giving it away when we're not telling the truth, etc. There are 10 specific channels of nonverbal communication. The first one is facial displays. These are very important in 3 arenas in terms of the fact that facial displays ultimately help shape our identity. Other people look at our face, they look at the way our face forms when we're speaking to them. That's going to represent your likeness. It helps people recognize you. It's the way that you recognize yourself, etc. It's also very important in terms of attractiveness. So we find that, according to researchers, people are found to be more attractive when their face is symmetrical. So if you draw a line right down the middle of somebody's face, ultimately, if the left and the right side are very similar or identical, that would be an indicator of someone being perceived as more attractive. Same goes with proportionality. A person would be perceived to be more attractive if their eyes, their nose, their mouth were all in proportion, rather than having one of those facial features larger than the other. And then also, in terms of face, we talk about emotion, which we've already alluded to. It helps us decode communication and find the message at the root of what somebody is saying. And as I mentioned earlier, we oftentimes rely on that more than we would what somebody is actually saying out loud. All right, so there's the first channel, facial displays. Second channel, eyes. Eye behaviors are known as oculesics, and they are comprised of when you make eye contact with someone, how you make eye contact with them, and then pupil size, how big your pupils get, how big you open your eyes, that kind of thing. Both of those can say a lot. The third channel is kinesics, which is the study of movement, and then the study of gestures is known as gesticulation. So when we move around, that's kinesics. When we actually use gestures, as in hand gestures, these are known as gesticulation. There are a few specific types of gestures. There are emblems, which there is a direct verbal translation for whatever that gesture is, and you don't need words to accompany it in order for somebody to understand what you're saying. So if you did a thumbs up, we would know that that means okay, all right, etc. We don't need to say anything out loud. An illustrator would be a gesture with verbal translation. So technically, a thumbs up could actually be an illustrator as well, because we could give the thumbs up and say, sounds good at the same time. But there's others where you would need that verbal communication to accompany the illustrator in order for people to understand exactly what you're talking about. Affect displays, these types of gestures communicate emotions. So this could be, let's say, a pat on the back, where in that case, we're showing our emotion, our empathy towards someone. Regulators control the flow of conversation. Earlier, I mentioned you're having a conversation and you're trying to encourage somebody to keep talking. Maybe you use your hand, that yes, keep going type of hand gesture. And then adapters are gestures that are used to satisfy personal need. And I remember I had a student in one of my classes in the past where I asked for examples, and they gave me a really good one that I'll never forget. And they said, when you do the pee-pee dance. And I said, boy, I'm pretty sure that that is universally understood. Yes. So obviously you need to use the restroom and you are looking uncomfortable, shifting back and forth. So that could be an adapter. Another channel is haptics, which is the study of touch. There are 5 specific types that fall under this category. There is affectionate touch. I think that's pretty straightforward. Caregiving touch, where we're trying to help someone, take care of them, etc. Power and control touch is more along the lines of trying to direct someone. So maybe you grab their arm to get them to follow you, where an aggressive touch is meant to actually potentially injure the person. So if you were to hit or choke, that kind of thing. And then there is ritualistic touch. So this could be a handshake or a hug. This might also depend on who you are and where you're from, the types of touches that you engage in that would be considered ritualistic. Vocalics are another channel. These are the aspects of your voice that actually convey meaning. So you have pitch, where it's going to be high or potentially deeper. Sometimes this can insinuate seriousness or excitement, things like that. When you are having variable pitch, that's considered inflection, and that could signal potentially that you're interested in a conversation, where if you just talk monotone the entire time, people generally don't think that you're interested in hearing what they have to say, or that you get the idea. Volume can say something without saying anything at all. If you're speaking loudly, it can show that you're maybe confident, where if you're talking a little quieter, it could indicate that you're maybe a little more shy or less confident. Rate, that would be another one potentially that would indicate maybe you're enthused about something, or you're rushing through something because you don't want to talk about it. Many different things that all of these can actually imply based on the person and the context, of course. Filler words are words like like, etc. And oftentimes they're used when somebody isn't necessarily entirely sure what they're talking about, or at least that's the general consensus. So it could potentially make someone sound less confident or less credible. Articulation is the actual pronunciation of words. Someone that doesn't necessarily articulate as well may be perceived as a little lazier because they're not accentuating each of those syllables, or maybe they're just a little more casual, that kind of thing. accent is going to be that regional dialect. You know, we're from the Midwest, but maybe somebody else has a Southern accent. Again, there are some misconceptions about what an accent says about someone. And then silence. Silence can say something obviously without saying nothing at all. It could mean that you're irritated. It could mean that you're reflecting on something, etc. So vocalics, a lot of different aspects to vocalics, and they say a lot, and we don't really think about this one as much. Another channel is olfactics. This is the study of smell. Memory is associated with olfactics. So think about, well, for me, here's a personal anecdote. Whenever I smell beef stew, I think of my grandmother, because it was rather often that we would go to her house and it would smell like beef stew because she cooked beef stew a lot. So I have a memory that is directly associated with a smell, and this happens quite often. A smell triggers a memory. Olfactics also play into sexual attraction. We smell someone, we think they smell good, and we are then sexually attracted to them. And it's found through research that we are generally drawn to people with dissimilar scents from our own. So we don't necessarily think that people that smell like us are sexually attractive. We're looking for a different smell. Another channel is proxemics. Proxemics is how we use space to communicate. And this is kind of one of those unwritten rules where we have certain distances that we use when we communicate, and that ultimately gives off a message in terms of how comfortable we are or what type of relationship we have with someone. So a researcher named Hall categorized 4 different spatial zones. The first one is an intimate distance, which is 0 to 1.5 feet. So that would be somebody that we are very close to. Somebody that maybe it's our significant other or a child. A personal distance is 1.5 to 4 feet. That's generally more of a friendly type of conversation, somebody that's known to us, a friend, a family member, etc. Social distance is 4 to 12 feet. This is often used still with friends and family, but it's often used more often when there are larger groups of people or if it's a larger space. So we find ourselves adjusting kind of around the number of people and the size of the room or the size of the area that's available. And then public distance is 12 or more feet. So this would be, you're just carrying on your daily activities and you aren't necessarily close to that person, or you're walking through the middle of campus and you see someone and you spot them and you yell over, "Hey, how's it going?" It's not necessarily somebody that you know very well, and you're obviously giving one another your space. Another channel is appearance. Physical appearance sends messages, whether it's intentional or unintentional. So we can think about wearing or makeup or not wearing makeup, how our hair looks, what clothes we're wearing, etc. We had talked about some attribution errors in one of the previous chapters, and one of them that we actually carry over here is the halo effect. This describes how we attribute positive qualities to attractive people. So if we think that he or she looks good, we assume that they therefore must be good. So we're using this physical appearance and we're coming up with a perception of that person based off of their physical appearance, and that physical appearance is obviously communicating something to us in order for us to have that perception. Unfortunately, there is a lot of pressure to be attractive or to look good And this can often lead to or worsen eating disorders and mental health issues, etc. Another channel is chronemics. Chronemics is the way that we use time to communicate, especially in cultures like the United States, where we are very time-oriented. Time sends a message about value. So if we value someone, we are more likely to give them our time. And that says something to someone. If we think, boy, they were really busy, but they took some time out of their schedule still because I wanted to talk, that sends a message to you. Time also sends a message about power. So we generally think that the time of those who are powerful is more valuable. So if it's somebody that's in a position of power and they give us their time, that sends an even greater message of value. Another channel has to do with artifacts. Artifacts are the objects and visual features in an environment that reflect who we are. So what do we surround ourselves by? Usually by choice. They can often reflect how we wish to be seen by others. So if we have a lot of sports paraphernalia in our house or in our bedroom, then it's likely that people will assume that we are athletic, and we are more than likely trying to exude that idea to others. Artifacts can also influence our mood and disposition. So the things that we surround ourselves by, they can make us happy, or they can also make us sad, depending. And colors themselves have moods. So you hear a lot about color theory in terms of what you should paint your room, what you choose to paint your room, and those can say something about the type of person that you are as well. Okay, so when we talk about culture influencing nonverbal communication, there's different ways that culture can influence it with all of those channels that we talked about. In terms of emblems, we may use different emblems across cultures. So for example, in the United States, we may say, come here, by waving our hand toward us, but in other cultures, that actually means goodbye. In terms of affect display, in China, when people put two fingertips over their mouth, that actually means that they're satisfied. But in the United States, we might do that if we were telling somebody to be quiet. For personal distance, in the United States, we have what we usually call our personal bubble, right? We don't want people invading our personal bubble. In other countries, that's considered aloof. Their personal distance, they are much closer to people when they're talking. In terms of eye contact, other countries see direct eye contact as rude, where in the United States, that's considered polite. Facial displays, a lot of countries don't necessarily use a lot of facial expressiveness. In the United States, we do. Greeting behaviors, in the United States, we often shake people's hands or smile, etc. In other countries, you will find that people give a kiss on each cheek to say hello. In terms of time orientation, I had already suggested that in the United States, we value time. So when we talk about chronemics, we obviously appreciate when people are giving us time. But in other cultures that are polychronic, they don't necessarily value time as much. And so that extension of value isn't as strong. Haptics may likely be different as well in terms of touching someone. The United States, we're generally pretty touchy-feely, but other cultures, not so much. And then vocalics may differ as well. You might find some cultures aren't as vocally expressive, or they use different filler words. Ours, like I said, like, but that's going to be different in other cultures. Sex influences nonverbals as well in terms of emotional expressiveness. Research finds that women are usually a little more expressive. Women also usually use more eye contact when they're speaking. Personal space-wise, women are usually, they stand closer to one another or closer to other people than men do. Vocalics, men obviously have generally a lower pitch to their voice. In terms of touch, we find that men are more likely to touch women, where women are more likely to touch other women. And then in terms of appearance, obviously women are more likely to use cosmetics, accessorize, etc. But these are all just generalizations, and there's always going to be exceptions, etc. In terms of improving your nonverbal communication skills, you want to focus on interpreting what people are doing nonverbally. So be sensitive to those messages that they're sending and think about this spectrum of channels that are available. Try to decipher the meaning of those nonverbal messages and, piece it together and think about all those different aspects. In terms of expressing nonverbal messages, if you're not as expressive nonverbally, spend time with people that are. That will likely help you. Like we talked about earlier, you tend to mirror people's behaviors. Or you can also participate in games that exercise your nonverbal expression skills, Things like charades or heads up, games like that are always really good. Or take a public speaking class too, if you haven't already. In terms of improving your electronic nonverbal skills, you should consider the visual and vocal cues that you're giving. So make sure that people can see your face. Make sure that the lighting helps people see you so they can interpret your facial expressions. Consider what your background looks like. We talked earlier about color having a mood, artifacts giving messages, and also the sound quality. So if people can't hear you all that well, they're not going to be able to use that, consider vocalics in terms of vocal variety and whatnot. All of these come into play. It says, well, video conferencing, but it's not even just video conferencing. It's when you are just chatting with somebody, naturally. So having Skype or what is it, Duo, Google Duo, or FaceTime, etc. And then when you're using texting, or if you're sending a DM, you can also use emoticons, or emojis, etc., to help you a little bit with nonverbal cues as well. All right, so that is it for chapter 6, you guys. And look, I'm breaking the electronic suggestion rule because you can't see my face. There we go. So please feel free to review the PowerPoint that I have online if you guys want a little bit more information. There's some videos there and some exercises that you can use. Review the textbook through Connect or read that hard copy that you have. And if you have any questions at all, just let me know. And thanks so much. Bye.